What I've realised from working with the shadows and working with the darkness is it's not as scary as you think it is. We just have to relinquish that control idea and actually the shame if we're feeling anything that's on the spectrum of what we call bad, that we're doing something wrong and something's wrong and something needs fixing, and actually just allowing that to be part of our human experience. There is a lot of power in our darkness, and that's often where the treasure is. We can't create a beautiful future just by bypassing everything that we don't like and then kind of creating a sort of fake utopia that exists on top of it.
Happy New Year! For episode 46, my guest is me. We had many requests from you to share more of my own story, and so we thought that this would be a nice way to start the new year. I am interviewed by Lucy White, who is our show notes writer. She has been on the team from the beginning and listens to each episode carefully, writing the titles and the words that accompany them. Lucy is a copywriter based in Stroud who is interested in all the areas we cover on this podcast. We met many years ago and have shared multiple networks and experiences along the way. She is currently training to be an equine therapist, doing this beautiful work with the horses. You can find out more about her work through her website, www.glowingphrases.com. We recorded this conversation this autumn on a stormy night in her cabin, just after I'd interviewed Polly Higgins. Lucy is a wonderful woman, and I'm happy that you get this experience to get to know her better through this conversation too. I am starting my next cohort of presence mentoring at the start of February, which is individualized one-to-one support in integrating your wisdom into your life, opening your intuition, and supporting you in creating and honoring daily practices. If you are interested, please apply in the next couple of weeks. And if you want to come on one of my immersive experiences, I have 3 coming up in this half of the year. A yoga retreat in January in Goa, India, with Misha Musa and some wonderful surprise guests. My Seva retreat in March in Rishikesh, India, with Ramina's Gardens Children's Home. You can listen to the interview that we did with Dwaba. And we'll be volunteering and spending time with the beautiful kids and working the land on the farm up in the Himalayas. And then Wild Grace in Spain, which is a week-long experience for women, where we'll venture on the heroine's journey and uncover different elements of our nature and essence. It would be wonderful to spend more time with you this year, and so you can find out more about all of these on www.amisha.co.uk. Amisha is spelled Amisha. And if you haven't yet downloaded the wonderful gift that Lucy made for you all, please do go to our website and click on Gift. The beautiful ebook, Creating the Future, has lots of inspiring wisdom from our first 44 guests, as well as 12 sets of reflection questions, which you can sit down and do all at once, or do once a month throughout this year. And whilst you're there, you can also download our ebook, The Future is Beautiful, and our visualization as a gift too. Thank you again for being part of this with us. And if you would like to support us, please do become a monthly patron, as these donations are a very helpful part of creating this offering. Please also share this podcast with your friends and other networks that you're part of so that all of these ideas can spread. I share some things in this interview that I haven't shared publicly before, which is a bit of a vulnerable experience, but a real honor to do. I hope that you enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to sharing some great conversations with you throughout this year. Here is to a beautiful 2019. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Ghadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions and to share what we are already doing,
We create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful.
I'm delighted today to be joined by Amisha Ghadiali. It's really lovely to have the chance to be on this side of the podcast and have this experience, and I think for us to hear your story and some of the experiences that you have to share. I feel like we've had some snippets coming through with your during the interviews that, you know, we've had these tantalising elements of your story, but just to really hear from you feels really good. So welcome.
Thank you, Lucy. It's an honour to be on the show.
Yeah. It's a new dynamic. Yeah. So your background really sort of echoes a lot of the weave of the show, like politics, sustainability, creativity, entrepreneurship, social enterprise, all of these different aspects, spiritual aspects. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit, you know, it's obviously a very rich and long story that you've navigated, but a little bit about how those different threads have brought you to where you are today, the show.
Yeah, I'll try not to talk for the rest of the episode on that one. But I suppose what I've been doing is following what feels the most alive, and then often something else has presented itself. And so it's never been a strategic journey, almost like I've just been following the clues and seeing what arises. And so I started off in politics. It's what I studied at uni. Was very excited about how politics could change the world and used to say phrases like that. And I used to volunteer a lot, anything from going and working with in an orphanage in Bulgaria for teenagers, or teaching English to refugees, like all this kind of whilst I was at uni, and studied politics, really interested in international development as well, and started to work in politics, working as an intern in the US Congress and for the Democrats on the Kerry campaign back in 2004. Also in Westminster, worked for an MP, worked on Make Poverty History. Lots of amazing campaigns, and actually some really quite amazing politicians. Like the politician that I worked for in Westminster, John Battle, he was really very inspiring as he was a poet. He really was very engaged with everything like that he was doing. And it was amazing to work for him. He felt very connected to his constituents in Leeds, and also to the bigger issues. But I guess what happened in the midst of that was I got run over by a 4-wheel drive pickup truck, which was the second in a trilogy of quite epic accidents I had between the ages of 19 and 24. And that one was, it was an intense experience. Yeah. And in the recovery period, I guess everything just started to look and feel different to how it had before. And a big element for me that was really alive was that I'd cut off my creativity, my expression of creativity, 7 years before that. And that something inside of me was therefore dead. And that really came to life. And that led to me setting up a jewellery label, which was meant to always be a little side project. And I was going to have a really very 9-to-5 structured career in politics and make jewellery on the side. And the jewellery was also kind of set it up in as ethically way as I could. And that was before there was really an ethical fashion movement. And I wanted to also produce in India, which was about creating a relationship with India and with Indians that wasn't related to my family. And so I was doing that, and then this sort of third incident happened, and that was an accident in which a friend of mine that I was with died. And I guess that threw some of my other plans off, because I had to go through a huge process of grief and guilt. Yeah, and in that it just sort of slowed my trajectory down, and then I ended up focusing more on the jewellery label than I intended to, and it ended up becoming a bigger thing. And actually it was amazing. Like I just worked on it. I think that's when my real workaholicism started. And I worked on it, and, you know, got it into some really nice boutiques and into features in some of the amazing magazines and newspapers. But yeah, it didn't turn into being like a full-on business, because you need investment and all of those things for that. And I was sort of ready to get back out there into like the world of proper work, and being kind of out, not on my own anymore. And I was really interested in ethical fashion, because I thought that ethical fashion is something that we can really all engage with, because we all wear clothes, and all of the issues that I was interested in through politics, women, development, sustainability, poverty, consumerism, like all of these things are completely encapsulated within everything, every item of clothing that we're wearing right now. And so I got involved in that, and it was the very beginning of the movement. This was 10 years ago now. And I started working for the Futera, which is a communications agency, a sustainability communications agency, and then the Ethical Fashion Forum. And we worked on the first ever Ethical Fashion Awards ceremony in 2008. And then I went on to work for the Ethical Fashion Forum, running a project on sourcing that was funded by DFID, the International Development Department. And that was kind of the beginning of that. And I ended up being very, very involved in that whole movement, and founding board member of Fashion Revolution when that started, and kind of just really kind of in that world. And then everything was a bit kind of, I guess, pieced together, because none of these organisations had money. So I was only officially doing 2 days a week, and then I was at Impact Hub, which was just called the Hub at that stage, and it was also in its early years as the first ever co-working space, in my understanding, and then of course all about social entrepreneurship. So then I was there as well, and then that led into the beginnings of Think Act Vote, which was the start of where this podcast came from. So yeah, all of that only takes that's actually like all like a long time ago. But that was sort of the basis of
up to the beginning of this sort of chapter that's culminating in the podcast where you are now.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's quite a journey already, even to that point, and it really feels like you dived into the world of politics and really explored a lot of different aspects within it, a lot of different angles within it, and then sort of moving the things that you really cared about and had discovered a passion for and a concern for, shifting that again into a sort of a more specific arena with fashion, and like exploring it through fashion. Yeah, it's amazing to follow those threads in such a different arena. And I feel like you're working in, again, a different arena now, another chapter, with your intuitive therapy work, with your yoga teaching and meditation teaching. You know, again, that's a very different arena from fashion. And do you feel like those threads are kind of continuing on into that work as well, that you're bringing those same threads along with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't feel like I am somebody that just does something and then stops and then does something else. I feel like I do something, and I do it because of the values of it, and I'm really interested in it. Often I've stopped formally working in it just because of funding availability, but I've taken everything from it. So of course now I can tell you the story of every item of clothing that I'm wearing, and it's all still ethical and sustainable. I didn't like forget that. It's just not, I'm not doing talks about that all the time anymore, but there was a stage where that was what I was doing a lot of. I guess after I started, so when I started, the beginnings of this project was called Think Act Vote, which of course you know, because you were in the book. And that was in 2010, in the run-up to the election. We had an election year in the UK, and I was just thinking how it was the first time that I was not excited at all about an election. And I used to be, like, I kind of was a bit of a geek. I was just really excited about democracy. It seemed like such an exciting thing to me, and citizenship, and the fact that, well, what I thought was a fact was that we had this system that enabled us to take part and make a difference and communicate our values and have an impact. And I realised that actually we didn't, and that I wanted to do something together. So I was talking about voting and about the fact that we weren't excited about the election. And so what came to me was this idea to create this ballot box and to ask people, what is the future that you choose? Thinking that what we do when we put our trust into politics is that we pick we have a vision of the world that we want to live in, and we find somebody that's holding that vision or something close to that vision, and then we give our vote over to that politician, that political party. And I thought, well, if we can't do that, then we all need to have our own visions, and we all need to believe that our vision matters. And so that was the start of it, really. And I got people to write on these little ballot cards. They said, the future I choose is ... And we just popped up everywhere with this wooden ballot box and got people to vote with their vision. And then that was really amazing. And I kind of pulled in sustainable fashion. So we did a design competition. People could design a Think Act Vote kind of logo t-shirt. What would it be? And Komodo, really amazing sustainable fashion brand, offered to sponsor the t-shirts, and they were these carbon neutral, like, amazing t-shirts. And so we did that, and then I got a lot of ethical fashion designers to refashion the t-shirts and turn them into dresses, and using offcuts from their previous collections. We did a poetry competition. Just like, how many different ways using creativity could we engage? How could we be creative activists? How could we talk about our vote, our future, in a way that was outside of mainstream politics and just in our lives? And so that's where this started. And then I started doing this thing called the Futures Interviews, which was taking this thing of, okay, so what's your future, the future that you choose, the world that you want to live in? What's your think, something that has inspired that vision? So maybe it's a story, maybe it's a film you've seen, maybe it's a moment that you were lying down underneath the stars, maybe it's, a podcast that you listen to. What's an act, something that we can all do in our daily lives that doesn't cost anything, that is creating that vision? And then what's a vote, something that we could support? So it could be a political party. It wasn't in any of the answers that we got, but it could be an NGO or a campaign, or a company, a business that's working in a way that emanates those values and that vision. And then we also got people to share their future soundtrack, the song that they would take with them to the future. So there's a massive playlist on our Spotify that has that. And 5 web links, so 5 things that they just find interesting on the internet. And I guess what I was starting to think about then, although I don't always strategize what I'm doing, I just kind of do it, and then I kind of realize afterwards what I've done. But what I was trying to do, I think, there was kind of realize that there's so much going on that's outside of the mainstream media that's really interesting, and I wanted to create a resource where we could find more of that amazing stuff. And so then that all came together in a book it was called The Future We Choose, and we launched it at Rio +20 Climate Talks. I never really liked that title, and I never liked the cover, and so we relaunched it as The Future is Beautiful, I think last year, and then that's where the name of this podcast came from. But what happened during all of that was that I got glandular fever, and I had a way of working which I still have if I let myself, which is a very, like, burning out kind of way. And when I had glandular fever, I didn't even know I had it. I just was ill all the time, but I kept going. In fact, when I was making the book, like editing the books, I kind of did it all myself. I was I just remember lying on my bed and then, like, you know, choosing which excerpts and what order they would go in, and then I'd just pass out for a few hours, and then I'd, you know, do it again. And I did a TEDx talk for the launch of the book, and it was with TEDx Oxbridge. I sort of arrived to the dinner and they'd done the rehearsal, and I'd missed the rehearsal. And so after dinner they were like, can you come and do a run through with us? And I was like, please don't ask me, I'm so tired. I went to do it, and they just said, please, tomorrow, can you do that with more feeling? And I was like, I will. I can't explain how tired I am. And I was lying on the floor backstage just before I went on stage, and I think they were so worried that I was going to mess the whole thing up for them. And they came, and I was just trying to conserve energy because I was at this like really crazy point. And then of course I did the TEDx talk, and it went fine. Like in you know, I'm not like, oh, that was amazing, because I was like, oh, I was so ill that day. But now when I think back to that, I think, well, that's a really crazy way to be living your life. And so then what happened was that I took some time out because I had to. My body was saying, stop doing this. As a result, the book didn't go as far as it could have done, because it needed me to be sending hundreds of millions of emails and to be speaking here, there and everywhere, and I just couldn't do it. And then what happened was I took some time out, reassessed, and I realised that I've always been a spiritually natured person, but I hadn't been paying it enough attention. It was something that I had always had these like really quite mystical experiences, like accidentally. And that I also had, I guess I would, if something was going wrong, so for example, after I got run over by the truck, or after my friend died, I really turned to spirit and spiritual practices and to that lifestyle in order to get myself back. And then as soon as I was back, in inverted commas, then, you know, the drinking and the late nights and the burning the candle at both ends would all start again. And I just made a decision in 2012 that I was going to make my spirituality the centre of my life and do everything from there outwards rather than the other way. And then, as it happens, you know, they say that then when you're ready, the teacher arrives. When the student's ready, the teacher arrives. And then they just kept showing up, the teachers.
A few of them.
And I was like, okay. And then everything started happening really fast. I had no intention whatsoever in teaching yoga or meditation or doing the intuitive therapy work that I do. In fact, I was a co-founder of a tech startup, and I was like wanting to do that. But again, that was dicey, because with my co-founder, it was all like late nights again, and and the guilt about going to yoga and all of that stuff. And I could feel my body saying, no, not this way, not this way. You can't do it this way. Yeah, I felt like I just got thrown even deeper into all of this training and these teachers, and so I think I thought at first, I'm going to do all this and I'm going to bring it back into that world, because I feel like there's a lot of people that are trying to do really beautiful things in the world, and we all have our destructive patterns. We're kind of playing a lot of that out. Back then, I thought that it was possible to clear ourselves completely from them and then like do our work in a really clean way.
Stuff.
Now, of course, I realise that there is no place where all of that's clear and then we're good and we're great and we're like really highly productive and blissfully happy and wonderful. And then, in fact, it's about learning how to feel and how to be more whole, and to make friends with the parts of ourselves that we don't like, and to understand when we're projecting or why we get triggered and riled up, and to understand whether it's our stuff or if it's because there's something really wrong in the collective and this is a real big time to be angry, and but how to navigate that. And that's sort of what happened. And I thought, well, I'll just learn to teach yoga And again, like this tech startup just sort of fell out of my life, and the yoga kind of came in and took over. And then I just sort of, then I realised that I was now just always in a room with women wearing fancy leggings, and mostly white women as well. And I thought, oh wait, what's happened here? Like, I feel like I've gone a bit too far in another direction, and actually what I'm interested in is where our inner and outer worlds come together. That's I guess where wanting to do sort of spiritually guided work, yoga with activism, in really entrenched into it, learning how to meditate in order to feel more and connect more to what's happening in the world. Our spiritual practices in order to be more present, and the intuitive therapy work in order, to be able to just show up with more of who we are in our lives. And then the podcast, just really seeing how all these different things can weave together. And for me, feeling like often being in all these different communities, like I don't know now when I think how I did it, hanging out with the kind of the lefties, political conferences, and then going to all this like sustainability stuff. And then, I don't know how I did it. But
broad spectrum of people and experiences.
Yeah, but that they didn't talk to each other. And that often it's similar values, but different ways of expressing them. But that in a way that felt quite siloed. And I noticed quite a few times that people were like, oh, you're doing fashion now. It doesn't mean anything.
You're no longer in politics, Or you're no longer in sustainability, you're in fashion now. That you're bringing those threads together and actually creating a weave. The people that you were speaking to are still seeing them as very... I mean, I even said, you moved from this world into this one. They're so very different, but you've been carrying threads, almost like pollinating. I'd like a bee, but something more about bringing a thread. There's a beautiful saying, it's from a poem, and I'm going to have to maybe look up and put in the notes the author of the poem, but it's, and it says, when people ask you what you're doing, you tell them there's a thread that you follow, you tell them about the thread, and it speaks about this thread that goes all through our lives. And it's sometimes not easy to see that going forward, but you can sort of track it backwards and see, that came with me this whole way from here, and it sort of feels different now, so it's in a different context, but it's the same thread. A couple of questions coming to mind, but the one that's coming forward now is just maybe to go back again and see, speaking about those threads, like, can you track back to your childhood and your youth where those threads, where you picked up those threads that you followed through politics and fashion and in spirituality, that sort of weave that you've been making, where can you track the origins of those interests and passions too?
I love this thing about the thread, and I think often about a spider in the web and the weaving, and that there's a role in weaving that is actually quite an important one. Well, so fashion, I'm sitting here and I'm wearing a cardigan that my mum's friend knitted for her in the 80s. And I've got on my legs.
Just describe it, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's sort of like if the stars were made of rainbows and they were poking through the skylight, it's sort of black with lovely little coloured threads sort of glimmering through. And it looks really cosy and like autumnal. I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you, me too. It is very cosy and bright.
Yeah, it's the audio experience.
And then on my legs, I've got this bright yellow fluffy coat, which I've also just recently taken from my mother's late 80s to 90s collection. So I think she was very into fashion, and I think also we had Indian clothes everywhere, bright coloured saris.
Beautiful fabric.
I guess the Indian way involves quite a lot of dressing up for women.
Yeah.
And so that was very much part of my childhood. But also, I've just always been interested in clothes. My mum said before I could speak, I pointed and cried and explained exactly what I wanted to wear.
It's fantastic.
And yeah, in a way it made it easy, but it was also like, oh wow, okay. It's going to be like this.
Yeah.
So I think that just that expression of colours and stories has always been really important to me through clothing. And so, of course, at the point that I realised that the fashion industry was crazily destructive to most of the people making it, selling it actually as well, modelling it, buying it, and the planet and all our natural resources. Of course, I just wanted to do what I could in that world and use it as a conversation starter. So people would say, oh, I really like your boots. And then I could be like, oh, well, they're made from, they look like suede, but actually they're made from recycled blossoms. And you just, you know, create these conversations everywhere you go. And people, it's something that people often compliment or talk about. So there's a conversation starter.
Yeah, lovely.
So yeah, that's fashion. Growing up in an Indian family in Derbyshire made me quite aware of a bigger world. And so we would go to India, and I think I remember being about 7 in India and being just shocked at all the poverty and the begging. Met all my relatives in India. It was only the second time that I'd ever been, and the first time was when I was a baby. And I think that it gave me this real sense of, oh my gosh, like how come I got to grow up in this house and have all this? And that was always really apparent to me. And then my parents also took me everywhere with them, and they're psychiatrists. So I went to a lot of psychiatric conferences as a child. And
It's powerful.
in different parts of the world, so I got to see places and meet lots of different people. I guess I spent a lot of time talking to adults, was also aware of mental illness, like as a very normal thing, because I knew an extraordinary amount of psychiatrists. I thought they were as common as the milkman, which is no longer common, but something I know you've had experience.
Yes, indeed. That's for another episode.
Lucy was a milkwoman, just
I
so
was a
that
milkwoman.
you know. Yeah, so I think that thread of questioning privilege came up really early. And then at the same time, I grew up in a world where I was often the only non-white person in the room. The schools that I went to we didn't live in the Indian area. And I think that was, my parents chose that. They didn't want to live in a little India. They wanted just to live where we were. That also affects your kind of sense of self and your understanding of the world, because you're always the different one in the room. Yeah, so I think that has definitely made me kind of political in a way. And I feel like my parents also were very active. And we discussed a lot of things that were going on in the world. They had my dad's Jain, and so Jain principles were quite spoken about and adhered to with different levels of intensity at different points, especially when my grandparents were visiting. And so I was very versed in Jain principles, which a lot of them are what are thought of as Gandhian principles of service, of not wasting. And then, of course, it was the 80s and 90s, and so there were credit cards and waste and a lot
time.
And so then those two things, I guess, were in. I guess that was my first meeting of the paradox. And my grandparents, they did a lot of volunteer work. They only wore khadi, so they only wore the white hand-spun fabric. They had a very simple way of living. So I think all of this was just kind of part of my existence. And then I had a really rough time as a teenager. I really struggled with the world, I guess. I really tapped into a lot of darkness. Yeah, I guess I lost a lot of years, I lost a lot of myself. And so I think that when I came out of that period, I really woke up and wanted to do something.
Wow.
But I think that that's also like not being afraid to go into the darkness, that was an early theme.
I see that, yeah, I see that showing up a lot in your work, particularly now. But I'm thinking about, I mean, there's a lot of darkness in the world of politics, and you know, if you're looking at sustainability and ethics in fashion, there's a lot of darkness there to be seen as well. And I know that in the podcast, like the name of the podcast, often when I speak to people about it, like, oh, the future's beautiful, oh, that's nice, it sounds really uplifting, and like almost you can feel them going, oh, okay, yes, rose tinted, you know, fluffy. And I'm like, you should listen to some, because we go there, you know, and people go there. And it's, you mentioned in a recent episode, in a recent interview, about not being afraid to look at the darkness and to do so from a grounded place. So it's like looking at the future and the challenges that we face, being able to stand firm and face the darkness that's there, as well as to hold optimism and to see the beauty that's there as well, and to work towards the vision that we want to see, but also to work with where we stand now. Over the time that I've known you, you've really worked a lot with darkness, with death, with shadow, with grief, with rage. Like I really feel that you go there very intentionally and very thoroughly. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, and what that journey has been like for you as an adult.
Well, it hasn't always been willingly. I definitely feel that. I think I'm learning now how to be more graceful when it shows up. I had some extraordinary experiences that forced me to go there, such as Julia dying, and the way that happened, and the guilt of being there and not dying and feeling responsible and all of that kind of thing that came up. And I just had no choice but to go into it. And it often feels like that for me with darkness. Like, I don't know, I've never been able to just be on the surface of anything. I don't know how to. I would love to, just for a week. See what it's like.
To float along.
Just not even to float, but even just to be. But that's not what being is for me. It isn't intense. It is like, I am always aware of the darkness, and then I also experience very deep joy as well. And I do really believe that we're tweaking our spectrum, and so we can kind of be sort of in the middle. Yeah, if you really want to taste that really deep joy, bliss, you have to go the equal amount in the opposite direction. You know, even when I used to say drink a lot, like I would have a lot of like, you know, depression that would come with it, for example. Or when I partied a lot, like I would really go to all ends of the spectrum, like, and have quite an intense time with it. I think that there is a lot of power in our darkness, and that's often where the treasure is. It's like you can go into those spaces. Like even this summer, I just had a really, really intense time of a lot of situations kind of coming up, but more than the situations, it was like something in me needed to die. Part of me was like, oh, it's because this flat's like got Wi-Fi networks too close to it. Like there's a kind of a Wi-Fi like a mask for local area near the building. So I'm like, it's because of that I'm feeling all these things. And actually I realized that with grief and with darkness, one of the keys is to kind of make yourself feel safe so that you can kind of go into that. I don't know if that's always true for me, because I think I've definitely gone into it when I haven't felt safe too. I've had to. But I think this summer what I did was I did create a really safe space to go very deep into some really deep, deep, deep darkness, both within me and also like collective grief. And I'm sure part of it is because I'm doing this podcast called The Future is Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so I'm inviting in a depth of experience with that. What I've realised from working with the shadows and working with the darkness is it's not as scary as you think it is. We just have to relinquish that control idea and actually the shame that if we're feeling anything that's on the spectrum of what we call bad, that we're doing something wrong and something's wrong and something needs fixing, and actually just allowing that to be part of our human experience, because of course it is. What I find is that when I have a really, intensely dark period and it feels like I'm in the cave, and I'm just processing and I'm in the depths of it, and sometimes it feels like you don't know if you're going to come back out. But I find that every time I come back out, it really is a rebirth, and I do feel so much lighter. I feel like I've learned a whole load of new things. Hard to articulate what they are exactly, but then I find myself like transformed through being able to do that.
Amazing. It's, having the image of you coming out of, when you come out of a cave and you come out of a dark room and you see the light and it's like blinking in, it just being brighter every time, and that intensity, the two poles of intensity that you're speaking about, of like the deep darkness and the deep joy. It's like the joy is brighter each time you come back from the deeper, darker cave. I can really get that feeling. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming into the dark places with me with this podcast as well.
It's really, I really resonate with what you say about the polarity. I remember a time when my grandmother passed away and I was on a train and I was leaving where she was to go 5 hours away, knowing that when I came back, she might not still be there. I might not see her again, but I didn't know for sure. And so I was kind of grieving the loss of her, and yet she hadn't gone, and it was very painful. And I was just really sobbing and crying on the train. My heart was breaking open. And at one point I looked out of the window and I was like, wow. I was like, we were just passing a field with it was a sort of half cloudy, half sunny day. It was a lovely field by the side of the train track. And it was just absolutely blown away by the beauty of it, by the colours, by the vibrancy of everything. And it felt like new and fresher and brighter and more beautiful than I'd seen it before. And in that moment, I recognised that was because, if I felt that was because my heart was breaking open in that moment, and the depths of the grief that I was feeling was allowing me to see more beauty and more brightness outside. And it was a very sort of like experiential knowing of that, whereas maybe that concept had been introduced to me at some point. I've gone, oh yeah, that makes sense. But remember the first time that I really felt it, I was like, yeah, this is for real. And it's always a comfort when you're in the darkness to be like, yeah, but I'm going to have such bright joy when I get out. To know that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel you with that. And one of the teachers that showed up for me was this mystic, amazing mystic. I remember he kind of unlocked the intuitive therapy work that I'm doing. He kind of guided me into figuring out how to do it, which involved some very unclear instructions and being told basically to go and find a tree in Highbury Fields. I lived near Highbury Fields at the time in London. When I got to the tree would tell me what to do, which when he said it, part of me went, oh yeah, I know what that means. And then most of me went, what? What? It doesn't make any sense. How's a tree going to tell me? And one of the things that he told me after, he basically said to me one day, we were sat in a pub, and he said to me, I was asking him some questions about spirit, about mysticism, about myself. And he just looked at me one day and said, do you know who you are? And, it's one of those ones where you kind of go, I think the answer's no to this one.
Looking at me very expectantly.
Yeah, wow. There's like a depth and then also a kind of, oh, I don't know if I want to go here kind of fear. And he reminded me that when we'd first met, some kind of information had become quite clear about some of the sort of spiritual gifts that I had. So I think we all have spiritual gifts. I don't think that it's a special thing. I feel like we all, like, our intuition is so powerful, and that it's such a wasted resource. When we talk about sustainability of the planet and how we're wasting resources, and I just feel like we're wasting so much of our human resource as well. But we know that we don't use very much of our brain, but when it comes to our intuition, we're hardly using any of it, and most of us are scared of it. And the sense that it's this woo-woo weird thing. I had that fear too. I'm just watching myself and I'm like, okay, I'm talking about this and I'm feeling okay about it. That's a new thing. Maybe that wouldn't have happened before this recent summer of darkness. And I had this experience where, you know, he said, okay, go, I want you to basically work on some people that we knew together and myself. He just said, make sure you do all the layers. And I was like, okay. And I was like, what do I do? And he was like, go find this tree. The tree will tell you. And of course, I walk into Highbury Fields and I see all these really beautiful trees that are a bit off the path, and I go up to them and I'm like, is it this one? And just get this sort of no feeling. I'm like, no, okay, it's not this one. And then of course I find this tree that's right on the footpath, right next to the tennis courts and the ice cream stand and the football kind of AstroTurf place. So a very busy part of the park. And I'm like, it's this tree. Okay, I'm going to be the girl that's sitting talking to this tree.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did, and somehow, and again, I can't really explain it, but the tree did tell me exactly how I needed to do these healings. And I went and I did them. It took me hours and hours and hours. And then I called him and I said, have I done it? I don't know. And he just went, oh yeah, you've done a really good job, but you've missed people's darkness. It's like, you're not looking at their darkness. Like, and we then worked on why I was afraid of that. And what he said to me is, you can't help anyone. You can't be a healer. And again, I didn't want to be a healer. But he said, you can't do it if you're not going to work with people's darkness, because that's what it is. You can't just make people feel better. You've got to be prepared to go there. And of course, you can only go anywhere with anyone else if you've been prepared to go there with yourself. And so that was a really big initiation in lots of ways. But it really taught me that there's so much beauty in the darkness, and to be okay with mine. And to be okay with the darkness in the world too, because how can we can't create a beautiful future just by bypassing everything that we don't like and then kind of creating a sort of fake utopia that exists on top of it. And I'm sure there was a part of me years ago that just wanted to do that. But yeah, the title of this podcast is slightly misleading because of my obsession with all, kind of constantly bringing in the darkness into every conversation.
The future is beautiful and contains some darkness. And that's why it's beautiful.
Yeah, the future is beautiful. Please note, there may be
some darkness.
Some of you may find triggering.
Known allergens in bold.
And then actually the more and more that I was prepared to kind of face that darkness, the more and more my intuition opened up. And that didn't open up into just a space of, you know, bright lights and shining beauty. That also, you know, when I'm working with someone, it's not like I'm just looking at them going, oh, you're such a beautiful angel, like, love and light, shing. There are healers that do that, and a lot of people think that energy healing is that. But what I do is much more psychological than that, and it's much more about looking into where our patterns are stuck and where that trauma and those trauma patterns come from. And I feel like everyone has a unique expression of their intuition. This particular teacher that I've had, he was very good at helping you to find your uniqueness in your intuition, just in the same way that we don't all write poetry in the same way, we don't all paint pictures in the same way. Of course, our intuitive seeing is going to all be different too. We don't all sing the same or hear music the same. And so I don't really believe that your intuition is something that you can just be taught in like a manual, although there is a lot of that in the world. There are a lot of people that will teach you a set of techniques, but I believe that it's actually, it's getting to know that part of yourself and then allowing that innate ability to form and actually like everything, and that you have to then go on a bit of a journey with it and figure out how to use it and get frustrated with it and not want to do your homework and push through and, you know, surprise yourself. And that was really the journey for me in learning how to do this work. And I don't know if it's also because of, you know, my background. My parents are psychiatrists and my dad's a Jungian analyst, that's influenced how I see when I look at the psyche. But what happens is I'm sitting with someone in front of me and I literally see like a pattern and I see where it came from. So how, you know, I might see a kind of almost like it's like an image of them as a 3-year-old, and you know, there's a party and they're away from all the other kids, and I can feel this like sadness and this isolation. And it's like these subconscious patterns form between the 3rd trimester that we're in the womb up to the age of 7. That forms so much of what we think and how we act. So 95% of our thoughts come from our subconscious, and 75% of them are limiting, self-sabotaging beliefs.
Wow.
That's Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, whose figures that is. I didn't learn how to do this in a scientific, technical way. But then when I discovered people's work like Dr. Bruce Lipton or Dr. Joe Dispenza, I discovered that there's science that kind of backs up what I've been seeing in this work, which is that these programs are like within our cellular body. And so actually it's about releasing them from our cellular body. And so that's what I've always said in these healing sessions, which again, I don't think of as, you know, I call it therapy because I think it's more active. So it's not like I'm removing this. It's always like, okay, like now let's release the trauma of the fear of not having anything to say to anyone or not being accepted by the people at this part, you know, not being accepted by people. And then we use the breath. So the person that I'm working with uses their breath whilst I also support it with my breath to release that energy from the cellular body, to release that story. And we go through doing this in the sessions, and then we awaken qualities that are dormant within. So again, if we don't have something, how can we just have it? I remember when I was younger, and people used to say things to me like, you just need some self-worth. And I'd be like, great. What is that? And
just
of course,
pop to the supermarket.
yeah, exactly. They would sell it if they could. I mean, they try.
They try.
And so I'd be like, okay, great. I know what self-worth means. I know how to explain what it is. I don't know how it feels in this particular period of my life when I was, and so yeah, if you don't know how it feels, you can go on a course or a training and you can feel it for a bit. You know, I've like ran across hot fire coals on like a 4-day workshop. Yeah, and then you're like, yeah, I've got it. And then like 2 weeks later, you're like, what was that? It just kind of drifts out of you because it's almost like it's happening to the surface of you rather than to the core of you. And, you know, you can read a book and then it might make you feel good for an hour or two. But what I kind of sort of started to see was that if you don't have a reference point of a certain quality or feeling, then you can't have it. It like there's nothing for it to hold on to in your body. And so actually through this work, what I do with the person that I'm working with is we create these reference points. And again, we do it with the breath, and it's like very energetic in the body. You feel it in every cell. And then they get to go away and grow it until it's completely part of them and completely rooted into their system. And then when they have experiences that tap that, kind of gets bigger, you know, it's got something to hold on to. Likewise, if you've got a trauma pattern in your body, then when you experience something that triggers that, that's got something to hold on to. And so then that gets bigger in your body. So if you can release that trauma pattern, and then if you can put something else in that space, then we can literally sort of shift our patterns, and then that affects everything that we do in the world. And so I kind of didn't ever choose to do this work, and I definitely resisted it, and I definitely resisted talking about it for a long time, as is the way it kept making itself known and louder. And I just realized that it was part of my language, and if I kept ignoring it, life was going to be difficult. And if I embraced it, that it was here and it was part of me, and allowed it and shared it, then life was going to feel more whole and complete. And it really just feels like it's another part of language that I'm using. I had some pretty intense resistance to that, and a lot of fear. And a lot of fear of being judged and it being woo-woo. What does that even mean, woo-woo?
It's a cocktail, right? It's like cranberry and and rum or something.
Well, that sounds all right.
I remember drinking woo-woos as a 16-year-old. Sorry, 18-year-old.
21 if you're American.
And suddenly now it's not the same. It's something else.
Yeah, and it's like I think it's just what we're scared of, we call woo-woo. And why are we scared of it? Because we're not using it, so it feels kind of alien.
It's a kind of dismissive language, it feels like to me, of something that we can't grasp, or, as you say, something we can't understand.
Yeah.
And sort of keeping it away.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like, I've been through that a lot, and I really was holding on to a different identity. And at a certain point, it's like you just can't hold on to things that don't make sense anymore. And it's really painful to try. And it's not painful in the way that when you're in your death cave, like processing darkness. It's painful in this like needless suffering way where you're just bouncing yourself around like at a tiny part of your capacity, restricting yourself. And that's really, really, really painful. And it's not the same as going deep into your darkness with intention and care and love. And so I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I'm doing that work. I started this mentoring program called Presence Mentoring. It was because I felt like this work is so supportive, and that a lot of what we do in the spiritual world is big peak experiences. And we do that for two reasons. One, because so many of us are so scared of like what we call spirit and spiritual, that these experiences seem to need to be really big to like wake us up and to leave an impression. And I think also because, you know, big makes money, if that's how you sell out things, right?
Yeah.
And
Draws a crowd.
I mean, to the extent that, for example, the ayahuasca plant medicine that is generally coming to Europe is mixed in such a way to make it more visual.
Wow.
So that, you know, we can have more visual, intense, deep experiences if that's the way that you're choosing to use to awaken. And it doesn't have to be that way. I feel like our spirituality, our intuition, that the waking up of that sense, those senses has to be part of our everyday experience. And so that's what I'm really interested in. And so I set up this mentoring program to be that integration step, because you don't necessarily want to keep going on to courses and keep going on these big peak experiences, but you might want somebody that can just touch base with you, work with you around what your daily practices, like how are you anchoring, what is it that you know, and how are you anchoring that into your life? And then also, okay, what's coming up now, and sort of getting to do this energetic work and kind of keep readdressing patterns. And for me, that's really rewarding work. And so I can't not do it, because it just seems like it's really useful, and I find it really enjoyable as well.
Right. Ikigai, it's like where your purpose and what the world needs overlaps. So sort of that flow point of where your passion and purpose and what the world needs and what you're good at. It's the sweet spot.
Yeah, totally. And it frees me up to be able to do this podcast and to be able to do other activism things. And so I'm kind of grateful for that weave. And I feel like it having to go between modes of operation, if you like. I don't know if I've ever thought of them as modes of operation before, but 1 minute or in the same day, having a call with a client that's on the mentoring program, or editing a podcast, or writing an article, preparing, for a group that I'm doing a retreat with in India. Like, it just keeps everything alive. It's like everything has to be alive. I'm out of the silos, it's like it's integrated. There are no boundaries in terms of who I am, if that makes sense. I mean, there obviously you have to have boundaries in terms of your relationship with others in the world, but I don't feel compartmentalized inside myself.
Sounds like instead of you moving around to all these different places, all these places are overlapping within you, and you stand where you are. So I'm thinking, as I was saying, Ikigai is about like a 4-piece Venn diagram where all the circles overlap, and that sweet spot is where all those 4 things meet. So all the worlds that you've been a part of, that you've been moving from one and then into the other, they're like, I see those as like the circles, and then the point where they all overlap is you, and you've having surveyed that whole landscape and now come to the centre of it and actually realise that you are the overlap, and your particular way of being and doing is the overlap, and they all kind of meet in you. So you don't need to be out of your alignment or off your centre or too far to one pole or something, because there's a place where they meet, and that place is you, and that place is the work that you're doing.
Thank you for that reflection. Because actually it is like that. If I'm too much in my computer, or too much in like campaigns and activism, or too much in like healing spirituality, the other things feel quite distant, and impossible actually to tap into. I think that's how a lot of us live. Like, we're just head down in one area. And of course there are people that absolutely has to be the way, because we are all wired differently. But for me, I feel the most connected to myself and to a sense of something bigger than myself, and therefore a sense of purpose, and able to actually do it, be active in the world, show up, get my hands dirty, my feet in the ground, muddy. Can only do that if I've got a nice balance.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you, so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs, Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty.
What's activism for you now? What form does that take? So there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. There's a lot of different tensions building. There's a lot of challenge and darkness. Like, there's been a huge amount of stuff unfolding in the world. How are you facing the future from where you stand now?
I feel like this relationship between the inner and the outer is really key. I guess that's why I feel like we have to be vigilant to be awake to both of them. If we're drawn more spiritually, we've got to be careful of spiritual bypassing, spiritual materialism, spiritual tourism, all the trappings of, getting too lost in the light. And if we're drawn to activism, we've got to also be careful about projecting, our pain and our story too much into what's going on and burning ourselves out. And I feel like it's all about values. And that's what this project was always about. Without values, without an inner compass, when we're all lost, our values point us in an inner and an outer direction. And so I feel like that there is, if we're talking about activism, I think that inner activism is definitely part of it. That whole, what's the quote? Yesterday I was clever, I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise and I want to change myself. So that whole part of it, of course, if we're dealing with our own pain, our own suffering, our own trauma, then we are able to show up in more wholeness. And if we are parents, then we are able to bring that into our future generations. We're able to sort of stop the line of the ancestral stories. And I think that that's really important work, because a lot of what happens in the world is that we're kind of just playing things out. And a lot of it comes from our cultural conditioning or our family conditioning. And so I think that is a really, really, really important aspect of it. But I think that has to be coupled with both everyday activism, so being aware of all of our actions. And that doesn't mean that they're always going to be perfect, because we've already realised that there's no perfection. So sometimes we will buy a plastic bottle of water, but most of the time we'll carry our own bottle around. We'll make an effort to be nice, to smile at strangers, to give money when we've got spare change in our pockets, to be generous, to look around us and make choices about what we buy, what we wear, what we do with our time. And that's just something that's happening on an everyday level constantly. And it's not, and it becomes actually a muscle, and it becomes something that you're not even thinking about. And I've definitely gone to the extreme of that, and then I've had to kind of pull myself back to being like, it's okay to, and then I sometimes think, I've gone a bit too loose, and pull back to the centre. So you've got to constantly be vigilant with yourself. You've got the everyday activism, you've got the inner activism, and then there's the kind of campaigns and cause-related activism.
Organised activism kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really about finding what it is that you feel the most stirred about. So some people talk about, what is it that breaks your heart the most that you see in the world? With The Future is Beautiful, we've done it the other way around. So it's like, what is your vision of the world that you want to live in? And then work from that. And, our book is free to download, and you can buy paper copies if you want. But for me, the main purpose of that book is it ends with the questions, like you can fill it in, and it asks you the questions, and the rest of the book just serves as inspiration and permission, and that's it. And there's actually a free visualization that you can do. You can download it from the website, and it will take you through the questions, so you can just have that quiet time to think about them. Yeah, figuring out what it is that you want to make a stand for. So I've made some clear decisions. I know I can't do everything. I'd like to sometimes, but I've learned that that's not possible. So I've committed to this podcast because I believe that we need a new narrative. We need access to new ideas. We can't all go on all these courses. We're not all going to meet all these different people. We don't have all these stories and all these ideas in our mainstream media. A lot of the people on this show don't get their books featured in newspapers and whatever it is. And so that's part of my choice. Like, another choice of mine is to know where all my clothes come from and to make a stand about that. And also because I am spending time in India. I'm taking groups to India. I've partnered with the children's home Ramina's Garden. We've had Dwaba on the show. And so for me, that's really important. As a yogi, how can I be attentive to the issues within the yoga world, cultural appropriation, and using yoga in a way that actually offers benefit not just to me. And so those are choices that I've made, and we all have to kind of make our choices of what we're going to really pay attention to and where we're going to build community. So I've been focusing that more recently on the building that I live in, getting to know my neighbours and that kind of thing. And so I think we all just have to make those decisions. And then I said there was 3, but I think that the 4th element of activism is what Helen and Norberg Hodge talked about, the big picture activism. And so knowing our limitations of what it is that we can and can't do, and kind of having a clear understanding of what's going on in the world, but still doing what we can anyway. And I've just found in my own life that the practices that I've learned through my spiritual and psychological kind of explorations have really helped me to feel more comfortable with myself and let go of needing to prove anything, needing to just wasting loads of time worrying about things that aren't important, so that I can focus on making the most of the moment that and knowing what it is that I can do and doing what I can. That all feels, that's kind of how I approach the future. And then what's alive? I mean, the feminine's a really strong feature for me, in my experience. I feel like the feminine's role is in the future is growing. And of course, I understand that as being a part that's present in both men and women. For me, that's been particularly intense. Like, I am quite feminine natured. Like, I just always have been, actually, but I was trying to, do things in the way of the system for some years, and then kind of spent a lot of years knowing I couldn't do things with the system, but feeling bad about it and not knowing what else to do. And so for me, that nurturing of feminine values, again, it comes back to the intuition and why that's so important. And doing things in a feminine way is really important. And for me, the Indian goddesses have really spoken to me, and that sort of comes through the yoga retreats that I do and Wild Grace. But it's also about listening and trusting. And so, for example, doing all these interviews without notes and without pre-planned questions, and just sitting in front of the person in front of me and looking into their eyes and starting a conversation and trusting that that's the conversation that we need to have, rather than taking on this notion that, no, this is how you do interviews, and you must have all these notes, and you must ask these questions, and you must grill, and you must interrogate, and you must be really smart. All these ideas, and just letting them go and just being like, no, I'm just going to look at the person in front of me and see what arises. And also, you know, on our team, like that decision to make it an all-female team, why is that important? Because most of the media is still made by men. Actually, even most people that work in fashion are still men. And so I'm interested in how we can move the feminine forward, and an obvious way to do that is to do things that are made by women that are in touch with their feminine. And so that's an experiment, because I'm kind of curious in how that makes it different.
Yeah. It's a new chapter. The future of the future is beautiful as feminine.
Yeah, well, they have those, there is that the future is female thing, isn't there?
Yeah. Beautiful.
But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, yes. You laid out your sort of 4 pillars of activism from the end to the outer. Yeah.
But I think it is sacred activism, what we're talking about. I think that politics and sustainability are part of activism.
Yeah.
I think that creativity is sacred.
It's the weave. It's a spider's web, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. It's really amazing to hear from you how all of those, I almost feel like you've just spun me a beautiful web right now with all these threads. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure everyone will enjoy hearing your full story, or some more of your story. Yeah, bringing you out a little bit from behind the mic as much as we can. Lovely.
Well, thank you, Lucy. It's been wonderful to be here in your cabin. Yeah, cosy. We've got the fire going and the wind outside.
Yeah, there's been some wind chimes, hasn't there?
And the wind chimes chiming in.
Please, yeah. See how that sounds, but it should be good.
And thank you for all of the beautiful work that you've done on the podcast, and this adventure that we've been on together.
Yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. I'm enjoying it. So onwards.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question: how will you create beauty in the world?